Hey there, and welcome to this explainer. Before we really get going, and before we dive deep into all the intense science and philosophy we have lined up, I want to invite you to do something super simple. Just take a deep breath, settle in. Try to focus entirely on your immediate present moment. Block out all the noise and distractions of your day, and just be here, right now, experiencing this exact second in time. Right now, you're reading these words. Without even trying, your brain is actively decoding these abstract squiggles into the English language, and you're listening to the sound of my voice. At the exact same time, you are completely aware of your own internal thoughts reacting to what I'm saying. You are experiencing reality. And honestly, maybe most profoundly of all, you are aware that you exist. I want to pause for just a second to really let the gravity of that sink in. The carbon and iron in your body, they were literally forged in the hearts of dying stars billions of years ago. And now, out of all the chaotic, lifeless matter swirling around out there in the universe, those dead atoms have somehow organized themselves in such a way that they actually know they're here. You have a sense of self. But have you ever stopped to ask a really strange, centuries-old question? Who is the observer behind your thoughts? Like, when you hear a voice in your head right now, who is the entity actually listening to it? Who is that tiny pilot, the metaphorical homunculus, steering the ship of your body, holding onto your memories, feeling your pain, and feeling your joy? What exactly is this invisible, intangible thing we call consciousness? To really grasp the scale of this mystery, it helps to compare two totally different realms. On one hand, we've got humanity's scientific triumphs. We're mapping galaxies billions of light years away, we've decoded the entire human genome, we've even split the atom. But ironically enough, the very scientists who pulled all of that off still cannot fully explain the minds they used to do it. Despite all our brilliance, the great unknown literally sits right behind our eyes. We can study the stars, but we can't fully explain the mind looking back at them. Section 1, the hard problem. Okay, so to understand this massive biological paradox, we first need to look at what modern cognitive science and neuroscience actually know about the human brain, and more importantly, where that knowledge just hits a brick wall. And this number perfectly illustrates the sheer scale of the machinery inside your head. 86 billion. That's roughly the number of microscopic neurons currently firing inside your brain. And they don't just sit there doing nothing. They create over 100 trillion synaptic connections. To put that into perspective, that is way more connections in a single human brain than there are stars in the entire Milky Way galaxy. It's just an absolute marvel of biological engineering. And the crazy thing is, we actually understand how a lot of this physical machinery works. We can track the neuroscience of perception with unbelievable precision. We know exactly how the visual cortex breaks down light into edges, colors, and motion. We know the exact motor pathways that let you reach out and grab a cup of coffee. We practically have the biological data processing mapped out perfectly. But even with all those neural pathways mapped, there is a massive, glaring puzzle left over. And that puzzle is the ultimate question. How does matter become awareness? How does a wet collection of physical biological cells, which, let's face it, is basically just water, fat, and some trace minerals, somehow magically create the subjective, vibrant, undeniable feeling of being you? In philosophy, these raw, subjective feelings have a name. They're called qualia. Qualia are the individual instances of conscious experience: the sting of a paper cut, the smell of fresh rain, the crisp taste of an apple. The weird thing is, there's no single area of the brain you can point to and say, right there, that's the consciousness gland making qualia. Which brings us to the philosopher David Chalmers. He famously called this dilemma the hard problem of consciousness. Chalmers has this great thought experiment where he asks us to imagine a philosophical zombie. Imagine a being totally identical to you, right down to the very last atom. It reacts like you, talks like you, but it is completely dark on the inside. No inner experience whatsoever. If a biological zombie like that is technically possible, why aren't we zombies? Why does the light actually turn on for us? Chalmers argued that mapping brain functions, like eye reflexes, that's the easy problem. The hard problem is explaining why all that mechanical biological processing comes with a rich, inner, subjective experience.
Think about purely physical processing for a second. A digital camera detects light, your smartphone understands voice commands, but it's just cold data. The camera doesn't, enjoy a beautiful sunset. Now, contrast that with your subjective experience. When you look up at the sky, you aren't just processing wavelengths of light, you actually feel the color blue. You have this rich, emotional inner world. So why on earth does the human machine feel something on the inside?
Section 2, Scientific Theories of Mind. Now, cognitive scientists haven't just thrown their hands up in defeat here. They're actively trying to crack this case. One of the most influential ideas out there right now is called global workspace theory. Imagine your unconscious brain is this massive, dark theater with a bunch of different activities going on in the shadows. According to this theory, consciousness is like a bright spotlight. Awareness happens when isolated pieces of information act almost like a live broadcast, getting shared globally across the brain's entire system. So it suggests consciousness isn't a specific thing or a single spot in the brain, but more like an act of supreme biological broadcasting. But then you have to contrast that with integrated information theory, or IIT. This was pioneered by researchers like Giulio Tononi, and it's fascinating. IIT basically argues that consciousness is an intrinsic property of complex networks. It suggests that extreme biological complexity and interconnection are the real keys here. When information is integrated so tightly that the system acts as a single, unified whole instead of just a bunch of separate parts, awareness mathematically arises. IIT actually even tries to assign a mathematical value called phi to measure exactly how conscious a system is based on its integration. But look, the humbling truth is, the mystery remains completely unsolved. I mean, these theories are incredible tools for understanding the mechanics of the brain, absolutely. But even the top researchers admit they still don't quite cross that crazy gap from physical mechanics to subjective feeling. We've mapped the theater, we understand the network, but we still have no idea who is actually watching the play. Consciousness is, without a doubt, modern science's biggest, most stubborn, unanswered question. Section 3, Altered States and Other Minds. To get a few more clues, we kind of need to broaden our scope, because consciousness is definitely not a fixed, rigid constant. Just look at states that totally alter our reality. Every single night, you fall asleep and dive into vivid, hallucinatory dream states. Or think about anesthesia. Surgeons can literally inject a specific mixture of chemicals that safely shuts down your consciousness entirely, temporarily erasing your sense of self and time. And even more mind-bending, split brain experiments. When surgeons sever the corpus callosum, which is the bridge between the brain's two hemispheres, to treat severe epilepsy, it can seemingly create two completely independent streams of consciousness inside one single body. Sometimes one hand will actually try to do something totally different from the other. It really proves that awareness is this ongoing, fragile process generated by the physical brain, not just a permanent switch that's flipped on forever. We also have to expand our circle of consciousness outward. Scientists studying animal consciousness are finding some absolutely astonishing things. Dolphins, elephants, great apes, even certain birds like crows display immense intelligence. They show deep empathy, they do complex planning. A lot of them even pass the famous mirror test. When scientists put a temporary little mark on a dolphin or an elephant's body, they'll actually use a mirror to investigate it, which proves they have an internal concept of self that's entirely separate from their environment. What this tells us is that consciousness exists on a broad spectrum. It's definitely not some binary trait reserved exclusively for humans. And honestly, that invites this incredible sense of wonder. Does a bee feel a tiny, primitive spark of awareness when it finds a flower? Like, where exactly on the evolutionary ladder does the light of consciousness turn on? From the basic sensory awareness of an insect, all the way up to the rich, philosophical ruminations of a human, awareness scales. It really seems humanity might not be quite as biologically unique and separated from the rest of the natural world as we once confidently believed. And that naturally pivots us to this massive, looming question in modern technology. Could artificial intelligence ever become conscious? We're already building AI systems that can process natural language, create incredible art, and solve super complex logic puzzles. But consider the famous Chinese room thought experiment. It basically asks, if a machine perfectly translates a language or mimics human emotion and claims it's afraid to be turned off, how could we ever actually prove if it's feeling true fear or if it's just flawlessly executing a brilliant line of code? Are they experiencing an inner world? Right now, science says no, but man, that is a debate that's going to define our entire future. Section 4, the ultimate unanswered question. As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look beyond just the biology and face the deep, honestly staggering philosophical implications of all this. The standard materialist view is that awareness emerges directly and purely from the brain's physical chemistry, but there are other ideas out there. Panpsychism, for example, is this philosophical view suggesting that consciousness is actually a fundamental property of matter itself. woven into the very fabric of the universe, just like mass or an electrical charge. Other speculative traditions suggest the brain doesn't generate awareness at all. Instead, it acts like a receiver, kind of like a biological radio tuning into a frequency of consciousness that already exists out there. It's a beautiful concept that spans all sorts of spiritual and mystical traditions across human history, and it still stands today as a seriously fascinating metaphysical possibility. And this brings us to a really profound paradox. The philosopher René Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am." Technically, everything in the physical universe could be a hallucination or some highly advanced simulation, except the fact that you are currently experiencing something. The single thing we know most intimately, the absolute only thing you can be 100% certain actually exists, is your own conscious reality. Yet at the exact same time, it is the one fundamental force of nature that we understand at the absolute least. It is so intimately close, yet infinitely far away from our scientific grasp.
Because at the end of the day, consciousness is everything you have. It is the singular magical lens through which every single human experience is seen. Every fleeting thought, every vivid dream you've ever had, every cherished memory that shapes who you are, every emotion that connects you to the people you love. Literally none of it exists for you without that quiet, mysterious observer looking out from behind your eyes.
So I want to end this explainer with a final provocative thought for you to chew on. What do you think consciousness really is? Is it just the hum of biological machinery in the dark? Or is it something deeper, something foundational to the universe that we are only just barely beginning to grasp? Take a moment today to truly ponder your own existence. I'd love for you to share your own theories and really reflect on what it means to be alive. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn and wonder with me today. Keep exploring,